I want to go back to something that was being studied when I was in grad school about 10 years ago was the human gut microbiome. And they were talking about, we found thousands of different species that inhabit the gut, this array of different bacteria. And, here we can sequence them all. And there's all these disease conditions that are associated with less diversity, and the more diversity seems to be better. Um, what are your thoughts uh, on that whole concept?
That theory, that concept. Well, I've in the first book that I wrote, which was One Sickness, One Disease, One Treatment, later became this book, which is Sick and Tired. I don't know if you can see it or not, but Sick and Tired. Reclaim your inner terrain. I have a section on there on probiotics, and I even developed some supplements of different strains of bacteria to help people. As I continue to do my blood research and look at the effects on that, I realize that the connection between microbiome and organization, which precedes the genetic organization, needs to be a lot cleaner if you're going to build healthy erythroblasts that become healthy red blood cells. The concept, I don't know if we could agree on this, but I think we could, is that the bacteria that is in the 9 yards of the intestines, which is approximately 27 feet, is quite diverse. And I heard what you said, the more diverse it is, it's better. I have gone from suggesting that what is even better is not to have any of it at all, because digestion doesn't take place in the small intestine. It's the worst place for it to happen. That food should be in a liquefied state at a pH of 8.4 once it hits the small intestine, to fold into the crypts of the small intestine, to be biologically transformed into healthy, embryonic cells, erythroblasts, and erythrocytes. And when that happens, this is when you see a change at the cellular level as it relates to the quality and quantity of the blood. This is why I recommend a plant-based, high chlorophyll, good, healthy, polyunsaturated oils, extreme alkaline water with pure, non-demineralized, salts that are whole salts that can be used, and even compounds of sodium, potassium bicarbonate to support the stomach. When that's done, you get a better result. So I've really discouraged those who listen to me or ask me that question, the use of probiotics, unless you're going to continue to eat foods that don't liquefy. And that's all the fibrous foods, which are not good for you. That's all the foods, the protein foods that don't liquefy and break down, which is now a doctor. His name is Dr. Pearl. What's his name? I'm going to tell you here, because I just discovered his book. I had a book or an article that I wrote called "Get Off Your Acid and Go to Health," and he wrote a book. He's a professor at UCLA. He's a professor at the University of Miami. I've done some work at the University of Miami on this very subject we're talking about. But he wrote the book called Drop Acid. And I'm not talking about LSD here, okay? I'm talking about get rid of the uric acid. And that's the breakdown of a product of protein. So this whole idea of more proteins and digestion and things that are taking place in the 9 yards of the small intestine, which has a circumference area or a surface area of 7,200 square feet. And the reason I can remember that, that's the size of a tennis court. If you've ever been on a tennis court, you could actually lay out your intestines and cover the whole thing.
No kidding.
7,200 square feet. And in that environment, ideally, you should be producing 5,000 erythroblasts every second. That's why I don't encourage fasting. Because if you encourage fasting, you go into body wasting. And the body doesn't use, I mean, it's when you stop eating foods that build blood, then you start losing muscle and bone. Yes, you do lose some fat, okay, but it's not helpful. So I really encourage people to feast. But getting back to the question, not fast, but feast. You can eat more of the right foods less often and get a better result than depriving yourself of the things it needs, which is chlorophyll, oil, water, and salt in a liquefied form. So there's only one.
A lot of evidence for fasting for all kinds of good things.
Well, that's the perception, yes. But when you start looking at the blood, you see it's a disaster. Anybody that's fasting, you look at their blood, it's like, holy hell, what happened? You know, but on the good side, when you're fasting, you stop all the shit that you're eating.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so you've cut down on the sugar, you've cut down on the protein, and all of a sudden, that's the benefit of that. But you don't have to do it. You just cut out all of that stuff that doesn't digest, because the stomach doesn't digest it. The small intestine doesn't digest it. And if you keep taking those probiotics, maybe they can help break it down, because that's a possibility. But that just creates more acid that destroys the appendages, which is the root system. The root system of the small intestine are these vesicles that are coming off the intestinal villi. And they foreshorten, and this is when you have health problems, because that's the root. You take roots and start cutting them off a plant, you know, they don't flower, they don't grow. This is what people are doing by taking probiotics. They're literally creating an environment of destruction, destroying the alkaline environment of that environment, which should be at 8.4. And anything that comes into that environment should ideally have a pH between 8.4 and 9 in a liquid state. So you got a choice here. Two choices. One, you can take your steak, put it in a blender and blend it. Or two, you can discontinue taking that. Or three, you can chew it until it's a liquid state. But I can tell you get better value if you take greens, you know, and blend those, you know, and start drinking, you know, rather than smoking grass, start taking wheatgrass and barley grass and hemp grass and these grasses and sprouts, and you start blending them and pre-digesting them. Because I've suggested this now, that the only instrument you have in your body to break down food is your teeth, and how you swallow it. Like if you eat, you highly chew it really good and it's liquid, or if you don't, it'll come out that same way. So if you eat a handful of peanuts or almonds and don't chew them, well, look what comes out. So much for digestion. And if you don't think it works, how about a high water content food? Take your choice. It'll come out totally intact, just like the Big Mac you eat. If you don't liquefy that, you know, chunks of that burger, you know, you'll chew it up, will come out in the same way it goes in. So the bottom line, no pun intended, is you have to provide a pristine environment that's free of bacteria, because there's no such thing as good bacteria. Bacteria is all morbid. It's the representation of cellular breakdown and disorganization of normality. And what you want to put in there is foundational foods for building blood in a pristine environment that's clean and pure, free of other varieties of anatomical elements or microzymas or their higher evolutionary forms of polynucleotides, which is nothing more than anatomical elements of these microzymas that organize and disorganize. Genetics is not living. It's just an organization of the microzymas. So this is what I call intelligent microzymian reprogramming. So you want to focus on keeping up the pH. Now, how would you know if the pH was even up? Well, you have to test. And the way you test is you test your sweat, you test your fluids, you test your sweat, you test your urine. And when you're testing these fluids, you have to understand, or you should understand, that those fluids are not product of blood, they're product of interstitial fluid. And the ideal pH of that is 8.4 or higher. So anytime that the pH drops below 7.2, which it does because there's ebbs and tides of this alkalinity in our body, it's not constant. It's not just pow. Interstitial fluid is not just at one particular. It goes from, a low. Right now, the low would be for most people on the planet 5 to 7.5. Ideally would be 7 to 9. In other words, it would never drop below 7.2 or 7. That's if you want to live longer. If you want worldly diseases or disease, inflammatory or degenerative, what have you, then your cells are living in these higher acidic things. So what you do is you take some pH hydrant paper and you test your urine. And do it for 72 hours. Don't change anything that you're doing right now. Just eat the way you're eating, live the way you're living, drink whatever you're drinking, and then just every time you urinate, test the urine, write it down, and see what the range is. It's called the ebb and tide of your interstitial fluids. The flood time is for alkalinity is at 3 p.m. in the afternoon. The flood time for acidity is at 3 a.m. in the morning. And
that sounds like a fun experiment.
So you can do that experiment at home, and you don't have to have a prescription for that. And I'm not giving you a prescription for it. But what I'm suggesting is you test it if you want to see if you're managing and maintaining your internal fluids properly. And that's the easiest way to do it. The treatment's really easy. In fact, it's not even a treatment. Unless I guess you could classify food as a treatment. I mean, you have to eat to live or drink to live. But guess what? The body needs salt. The form of salt that the stomach's producing, sodium bicarbonate and potassium bicarbonate, all you need to do is just add those into your diet. This is how the people that lived during the time of the Spanish flu epidemic were up to 50 to 100 million. I don't know, you get so many different numbers, but 100 million people died from some fake phantom virus. Anyway, the way they thrived during that time is they took, and I've actually got the booklets on it from Arm & Hammer. They were promoting baking soda back then. And so take 1 teaspoon of baking soda 3 times a day. These people never got sick. Never.